Did you know that only 18% of women can reliably orgasm from intercourse alone? That means 82% of women need something more. And most of them have never been told or figured out what that something is. Now, it's not about just finding the right position, being with the right partner, or just taking longer. It comes down to one specific thing that your body is almost certainly not getting during sex. I'm Dr. Rina Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today I'm going to break down what the research actually says about female orgasm during sex, why the way most couples have sex is biologically working against women. And there's a specific technique that researchers have tested in controlled trials that actually helps women orgasm better. I'm going to share exactly how to do it, but first you need to understand why the problem exists in the first place. First off, people just don't understand female anatomy and how it relates to pleasure. And it's not anyone's fault. No one is teaching you about female anatomy. Sexual education in school, frankly, sucks. Our parents don't talk about it with us. And so you're left with watching erotic films where the females orgasm on command, basically within minutes of penetration, and reading articles online which are basically subliminally telling us it's our fault because we're just not gods in bed and we're not doing the right position and we don't know the hacks. But the real reason is the clitoris is the primary organ for sexual pleasure and the most reliable route to orgasm. But what most people don't know is that the clitoris is not just that small little bud you see on the outside. It's actually a much larger internal organ, and it goes deep in the pelvis, and it has a shaft, and then it has two legs called a crura that extend back along the vaginal walls. And what you're really seeing is just the head. Basically, like the head of the penis, you're seeing the head of the clitoris. Now, here's where the problem comes in with traditional sex, what we think good sex is. So typical penetrative sex is basically what people tend to do most often, and that's in and out thrusting, right? Just in and out. And that does actually very little to directly stimulate the clitoris. It's basically like if I were to stimulate a male's scrotum. It might feel great, but it's certainly not going to make him orgasm alone. And it's the same thing. The clitoris actually sits above the vaginal opening. So when you thrust in and out, it's not doing much to stimulate the clitoris. So if you or your partner have felt like something is missing, you're not broken. You are not like missing something. You just have been told that this is how sex is done. And the mechanics are just not centered or designed around anatomy that matters. So this brings me to that studied technique that actually works. Because once people really understood female anatomy, and let me tell you, it's taken a long time to truly understand it. And in fact, the clitoris was just recently mapped out in terms of how many nerves are in the clitoris, like only a few years ago. But since we finally understand this, researchers started asking a very specific question. What if instead of thrusting, couples moved differently? Does this make a difference during penetrative intercourse? Would orgasm rates actually go up? Instead of moving more, what about changing the technique? And this is because most people assume that more movement, lasting longer in bed equals more stimulation. But the data actually tells us a very different story. So in a large study of over 1,200 women, researchers used what's called structural equation modeling, basically this statistical method to analyze what body movements during vaginal intercourse were actually associated with more frequent orgasms. So what they found was back and forth rocking and swinging movements of the pelvis and the trunk, your abs and your back, during intercourse were positively associated with orgasm frequency. And even when you compared it to just rubbing the clitoris when the body remained still, they actually had more orgasms when they did sort of this rhythmic rocking motion. And so what this tells us is it's really the motion, right? This rhythmic motion keeps continuous contact between the bodies. It's more effective than an isolated manual stimulation on an otherwise body that's not moving very much. So in other words, the motion matters as much as where you're doing the motion. Another study, which was a representative study of the US population, looked at 3,000 women and tried to put sort of percentages. So they identified a technique they called rocking, where they basically found that the base of the penis or a toy was rubbing the clitoris by staying fully inserted rather than thrusting in and out. 76% of women reported using this technique to make vaginal penetration more pleasurable. Another technique they did is angling, where they adjusted sort of the tilt of penetration to increase clitoral contact. So women are doing this to essentially get more stimulation of the clitoris, and that was used by 88% of women. So instead of thrusting in and out, bottom line, try to rock front to back and stay fully inserted rather than thrusting in and out to allow continuous contact with the area of the clitoris. Now, unlike what most people think, sex and being good at sex takes practice. And practice is okay. If anything is worth practicing for, it's sex. Sex is supposed to be fun. It's playful. So just don't take it so seriously. If you mess up or something doesn't work the way you want it to, it's not a big deal. It doesn't mean you need to catastrophize. Now, they also looked at a very specific technique, and it's actually developed precisely to solve this problem. And it's actually been looked at in multiple studies. It's called the coital alignment technique. Now, if you watched the Sex Life TV show, they actually had a whole scene where they showed this sort of technique that he was using that was extremely pleasurable to the female partner. So this technique was developed by researcher Edward Eichel in the late 1980s. You start in a modified missionary position. So essentially similar to missionary, but the penetrating partner actually shifts their body upwards. So they're riding a little higher than usual. So the base of the penis, or if you're using a toy on your penis, is in constant contact with the external clitoris. Do you see a pattern here? It's all about clitoral stimulation. So instead of thrusting in and out once they're in that position, both partners move in sort of like a coordinated pressure, counter pressure, rocking motion. In the original study that described this, they had 86 participants, and women who learned the coital alignment technique had significantly higher rates of orgasm during sex, higher rates of simultaneous orgasm with their partner, and they described their orgasms more often as complete and satisfying when compared to the group that didn't use this technique. Not every study showed this sort of uniform dramatic results, and some researchers have found more modest results, and outcomes generally depended on individual anatomy. Now, if you're new here, I've had a prior video where I talked about how actually depending on the thickness between the vagina and the clitoris, that can affect sort of orgasm frequency as well as sort of the volume there. And so that's going to be variable from person to person. But at the end of the day, if you want to try different things, you absolutely should. One, it brings novelty into the relationship. It allows you to try new things. And if it works, that's great. But with this particular technique, sometimes it requires a bit of practice because it's not intuitive. And so overwhelmingly, the evidence is pretty positive for this technique, but it's not really magic. It's a tool. And just like any other tool, it works better when you practice it and you communicate with your partner. Now that I've told you the research, let me give you 4 tips that you need to really maximize pleasure and enhance orgasm in your relationship. First, you have to talk about it, and then you got to try it. Before you try any new position, you have to make sure your partner is on board and that you're working together. It's like a choreographed dance. If you're moving one way and your partner's not with you, it's not going to work. So you have to actually bring it up before you're in the bedroom. Say, hey, I want to try this new position. Are you into it? And this is how we do it. And if it doesn't work, like, what do we do? It's okay, right? Because it might not. It's the first time you're trying something, but like, hey, let's try this out. Because if you start rocking one way and they're rocking the other way, it's not going to work. The second tip is you don't have to do the specific coital alignment technique. You can apply rocking principles across any position. You can do it with the woman on top so that she can angle her hips forward and grind against sort of the mons area, the pubic bone, rather than moving up and down. And again, the principle is always the same. Stay in contact with the clitoris and continue rocking or stimulating the clitoris throughout penetration. Third, try pairing. That same large survey found that about 70% of women use this technique called pairing, meaning they add direct manual clitoral stimulation during penetration. So either they stimulate their clitoris, their partner does, they use a toy, whatever, but they're also stimulating the clitoris. And guys, the research shows it over and over again. Orgasms are more frequent and more intense when you have clitoral and vaginal stimulation at the same time. So if you rock and you have direct stimulation, you're probably going to get the best of both worlds. And number 4, consider trying some sex aids like pillows, swings, or even specialized stools to help you try certain positions more comfortably. And I've actually previously talked about these different sex aids on the channel before, so check out that video. There's so many different options. You can start with something really affordable or even just a pillow, and you can be more adventurous and try different things. Now, if you're a woman watching and you've never been able to orgasm during intercourse, or you've always needed to finish separately, I think the big takeaway is that you're not alone. The majority of women need clitoral stimulation to climax, so you're not broken. And you just need to figure out how to get better clitoral stimulation during climax. Also, a big thing is making sure there's enough arousal and enough lubrication. And that can easily be enhanced by taking more time with foreplay and incorporating lubricants, which are great and I've talked about as well on this channel before. If you want to learn about more ways to improve your sexual experience, I need you to think about pre-ordering my book, The Hard Truth. It comes out September 1st, so you might be thinking, why should I pre-order? These pre-orders are so important for authors because every single copy we sell before publication week sends a signal to the publishers, to the media, that sexual health needs to be taken seriously and this book is important. And we really need more and more people to learn about sexual health, to have more pleasure. So be a part of the signal and pre-order your copy today from any major retailer. The link is in the description or check it out at rinamalikmd.com/hardtruth. And if you order now, you can get up to $500 free for pre-order bonuses. So to wrap it up, this is what I want you to take away from this video. 80% of women can't reliably orgasm from intercourse alone, and that is completely normal. The research would support that having any form of sustained clitoral contact through rocking, grinding, or just directed stimulation while you're penetrating is far more effective than in and out thrusting for producing orgasms. Now, sex is not all about orgasms, but they're pretty great. Doesn't matter what you're doing, but the underlying principle is more important. Keep clitoral stimulation, keep it in contact, move together rhythmically, and you will have better outcomes. If you found this helpful, I'd love for you to subscribe. I put out evidence-based content on sexual health and urologic health every single week, and I'd love for you to learn more. And as always, I'm going to take care of yourself because you're worth it.